Let's do a simple experiment. Start by pointing your index finger. Now, I want you to bend your finger, like this. Can you do this? How about at the base of your finger? And at your wrist? The parts you could move are called joints. These joints allow us to move and dance. However, there are more to joints than just the fact that they can move. Now let me introduce to you the degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom are the number of ways a certain part can move. For example, you can only bend your finger like this. You cannot twist it or bend it sideways, no matter how hard you try. That means it has only one degree of freedom. But, at the base of your finger, you can bend forwards. And also bend sideways. The same joint being able to move in two axes means that it has 2 degrees of freedom. Thanks to the second degree of freedom, you are able to do this. The same applies to your wrist. It can bend forwards and sideways. Incredibly, the wrist has one more degree of freedom, in which you can twist it at an additional axis. You make use of this degree of freedom when you turn a doorknob. Thus, the wrist has a total of 3 degrees of freedom, moving at 3 different axes. Now, let's look at the 3 types of movements at the wrist. This up and down movement is called pitch. This side-to-side movement is called yaw. And this rotating movement is called roll. Of course, the more degrees of freedom an organism has, the more complex or unique the actions that it can perform. And as you might have noticed, one cube servo can only move in one axis. So for each additional degree of freedom, you will need an extra cube servo to move the added joint. Thus, you need more cube servos if you want your robot to perform more complex movements. In general, adding degrees of freedom to a robot increases its maneuverability, the range of terrain on which it can travel, and also the number of gates it has. However, there are some disadvantages. In order to have more degrees of freedom, your robot will need more servos to move the additional joints, and thus, it is heavier and consume more power. Also note that, a degree of freedom has its limitations. Not all joints can swivel 360 degrees, as each joint has an angle restriction. For example, generally no human joint can rotate more than about 200 degrees. For rero robots, the limitations could be from servo angle restriction, and wire length limitation. In order to protect the cube servo and its wires, you must remember to set the path limits for each cube servo before you teach the robot to move. This is an important rule, and should always be taken note of when designing your robot. Let's apply what we have just learned and build our robot for today.